So what I'm going to do, so we're going to have an overview of the baseline assessment, and then I believe that we need to have a discussion afterwards, which everyone can join in with. And if there are questions, if you can wait till the end, please do, because there'll be a discussion. But if you really need to jump in, then just shout. And can you shout? Because the way that because I've got to do the clicking, I've lost people's faces, so I can't see you if you wave. So if you actually sort of shout out if you've got a question as we go through. So the first part of the presentation, I will talk about the assessment process and also about the structure of the report. But then I will talk in detail of the summary of the findings. The reason that I thought I should probably review the process and how the report was written, so sort of the structure, is because for some of you, I may not have talked to you for a while about the domains or anything like that. So I thought it was good, if we're going to discuss it, that we all have a kind of a clear view of what the report entails and what it looks like. So the assessment process. So I'm sure that you probably remember, but just to remind everyone of what happened. So it started kind of a while back. In 2019, and when I came in post in the summer, I started by having meetings with a wide range of agencies, managers and operational staff, about sort of what their services offered, and also explaining the age-friendly domains, the World Health Organization framework. I've also done an awful lot of desk-based research, probably more desk-based research than I had initially planned on doing because of COVID, and COVID obviously did restrict some of the activities that we were able to carry out. We did, however, manage to carry out quite a few focus groups. I believe there were 11 actual focus groups we carried out, and that was with a range of organisations. So there were the TED friendship groups, there were the Carers First Men Do groups, there was the Lincoln and Lindsay Blind Society and the Alzheimer's Society. So going into already established groups that felt comfortable to talk about different things. So I was there to facilitate, sometimes with colleagues from the TED delivery team, but always with the person who they were used to being there, so that they were comfortable speaking. I'd had a number of one-to-one conversations with older people to ask their views. We did do some of the walking audits, but unfortunately many of them, in fact the bulk of them, were scheduled for end of March, beginning of April. So we had to postpone and then cancel those. Similarly, we had to postpone and then cancel the train audit and bus audit. So the transport information is done largely from focus group, survey and desk research. Okay. So the report itself, so it's a big document, even though it's not quite finished. It's a physically large piece of writing. It is very research-based, rooted in research, and I think that while future baseline assessments, because this is a cycle, we have to do this every few years, may not need to be so big, and this is something that's come from other parts of the UK network, that their first baseline is normally quite a big weighty document, and then subsequent ones can be smaller. It's important that people know what the research out there says about each of the domains and what it is to be an age-friendly community, and what needs to happen so that people live healthier, happier, more comfortable older lives. So each of the domain has got a little bit of a research background to it. It's structured like a standard report in the sense that it has got a sort of an introduction and conclusions, but each of the 8 domains does have a section itself. So when looking at the report, we did wonder whether we, approach it in a more sort of holistic way, but it felt the best way to do it was to actually focus on each of the 8 domains. And I will talk a little bit about each of those next. And the reason that on that slide you've got little focus on bubble there is because for each of the domains, what we decided to do, and I say we in the sense that Michelle, William, and previously Amy, but now Jane and myself have had meetings to talk about structure and the way that this is written. So it's not just sort of me that's made the choice. So we have a focus on within each domain of a piece of good practice or an idea for what we may want to do. And I'll explain what I mean for each domain as I talk in a moment. Then we've got a section which looks at what's going well and one which what are the challenges. So, and then finally we look at the opportunities to make changes. So that's the way the report is laid out. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is very briefly remind people of the 8 domains that are part of the World Health Organization framework, and no matter how we write it or how we deliver a strategy and action plan, it is those 8 domains that we need to measure ourselves against. So we've got outdoor spaces and buildings, and I'm not going to read the statements, I'll assume that you can. But the focus, so this is where I'll explain the focus on. So when we looked at outdoor spaces and buildings, a lot of the findings from that come from the walking audits and focus groups. And I'll talk about the findings at the end, but the focus we've had is the Hildred Shopping Centre. And for those that don't know, the reason for that is that the Hildred has been a bit of a flagship for age-friendly business and age-friendly approaches. And in some ways, when you talk to the public in Skegness, they see the Hildreds as a bit of a community centre almost. So there's a focus on the Hildreds and what they've done around age-friendly, including the banter benches, which is where people before COVID could sit near each other and have a chat with somebody, a stranger, and it encourages people to talk to each other and reduces isolation and loneliness. So transportation, again, we focus here on Call Connect, and it was, although transport probably won't surprise anyone, transport was one of the biggest negatives in the assessment. There were probably more complaints about transport than anything else, and its relation to other domains like health. Call Connect had quite a lot of positive feedback about it, so I did a focus on Call Connect, so that's in that one. The next one is housing. We focused on the wellbeing service for that, because although obviously they are not a housing organisation, they enable people to live well within their own homes. So we focused on the wellbeing service because there were lots of positives that came back about the wellbeing service. Social participation, our focus then was on the TED Aging Better programme in its wide form. So the friendship groups, yes, but also the partner delivery. So so there is a focus on the work that each of the partners has been doing in that section. Respect and social inclusion, and this is largely about the way that older people feel that they are perceived or that they are perceived. And the focus here was not on something that we've done a lot of in East Lindsey. It was on something that is a Centre for Aging Better initiative that's been used in other age-friendly communities, and one that we've done a little bit of on social media, but that is something that we could really use to change the perspective, the perceptions and the perspective people have on aging and older people locally. And if we change attitudes, then that will make a massive change to lots of elements of life for older people. Civic participation in employment. For this one, I've mentioned the DWP Fuller Working Lives in it, but I've also focused on the project that YMCA Lincolnshire has, which is the Age Friendly Futures, which Eve already kind of mentioned very briefly at the beginning. and that's an employment project for people over 50 in East Lindsey. And again, that is actually done in some partnership with the Hildred Centre, so that's the focus for that domain. And the final two domains, so we have communication and information, which has been a massively relevant issue during the COVID pandemic, because obviously people have had to communicate with older people in different ways, and older people have had to maybe reluctantly jump on the digital bandwagon, or maybe just increase their knowledge of how to work digitally. And the focus there has been partly digital, so I have done something on the use of digital communication, but also on the points that we should consider about hearing loss, visual impairment and dementia. And I don't mean necessarily those in their extreme forms, but actually a healthy old person is likely to experience some element of hearing loss and visual impairment as they become much older. So people in their 80s and 90s will probably have some level of loss in both of those senses, and that has an impact on the way they experience the world. So, and how things are communicated to them and how information is gained by them. And then the last domain, which is huge, community support and health services, and actually is probably the one that overlaps with absolutely all the other domains, people's health. We did a focus on mental health services for that one. So that's the structure, if you like, of the report. That's how it's laid out, and those are the focuses. I'm going to ask now if anyone's got any burning questions they want to ask me before I go to the next stage, which is the findings. No? Okay. Is everyone okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah? Okay, that's good. Right, okay. So the assessment, it did show us that the experience of older people living in East Lindsey is not equal, and the likelihood of them ageing well is dependent on the intersection of a number of factors, with all of the age-friendly domains playing a part. And that's probably not a surprise to anyone here, and it mirrors the national picture, that actually the experience of ageing is not an equal experience for everybody. So now we shall look at what is going well and what were the challenges. And for this, I will do a little bit of reading my notes because there's quite a lot of detail. So, what is going well? So we found that for most people, they find that it's an attractive place to live. It's very attractive for tourism, for people to retire to. And it was a really strong message in focus groups and walking audits and one-to-one conversations that East Lindsey is generally a very lovely place to live, that it's visually lovely, there's big skies, there's lots of open spaces. So, you know, it's kind of, yes, some of the detail of the way certain areas are, and there are always room for improvement, but generally speaking, people enjoyed living in East Lindsey. Property prices are reasonable compared to national averages, and there's a lot of people who've chosen to retire here because they may have a small property in another part of the country they can sell, and then they've moved here and they can buy somewhere. And that came up quite a lot in focus groups, of people making the choices to live here, but maybe never even heard of it. Some people have been on holiday, but they just decided it was a lot cheaper, so they'd have a more comfortable retirement. And that was a message that came through again and again. Another thing that we're doing well is the willingness of the local authority and other organisations to improve things for older people. And that's something I've seen when I go into national meetings, that actually in East Lindsey, the willingness is there, the political will's there, senior managers want to make the change. There aren't the obstacles that some areas have. So evidence of this is obviously the ELDC TED partnership, which we all know about. William's role as portfolio holder, which is quite unusual. So whereas other authorities might have an older person's champion, we are, I think, quite unique. And actually, I've been in another meeting this morning, and Ange Jones from the Centre for Ageing Better is going to find out if we're the only one, because she thinks we might be the only one with a portfolio holder dedicated to better ageing. Obviously, you've got membership of the Centre for Ageing Better network, and I'm on the steering group. And then we've now, East Lindsey is part of the rural partnership. So there's lots of evidence about the willingness of those people in power, if you like, to make the changes needed. From the point of view of activity, so another thing going well in coastal and market towns, and in some villages, there are quite a wide range of activities pre-COVID. Now, obviously, COVID has changed the amount of activities people can do, and obviously, if they can access them digitally, then it's not too bad. But actually, before COVID, what we found was that in the towns and coastal communities, there were lots and lots of things to do. In fact, on some days, people didn't know which things to do. However, for some people living in villages that haven't got a buoyant community centre, they felt quite distant from activities, and it was largely linked to transport issues. So a lot of the activities are there, but where they are and how to get to them can be a problem. COVID-19. So the crisis has encouraged older people to engage more fully with digital communication. So locally, in a way, we mirror what's happening nationally. So for some people, it's making them more isolated. For those people that either won't or can't use digital technology. But for a lot of people, it's actually kick-started them into actually using it more or starting to use it. And that's something that we found locally as well. Another thing that's a positive for us is the Towns Fund and the opportunities that brings. And there is a feature within the draft report on the Campus Future Living, which, although it's not currently built, we know it will be. So we've put that as a feature of some of the things that we'll be building on in the future. Some of the challenges that came out, I've already mentioned it, public transport. So the majority of people report that the provision of public transport is not satisfactory. Limitations of the bus services due to the large rural area and the cost of running buses means that people are not able to easily access social activities, carry out essential tasks such as attending health appointments. What I did find was that almost everybody I spoke to in focus groups in coastal communities were quite either, they were bordering from upset to downright raging about how difficult it was to get to health appointments, and that there was not an equity of access to health appointments. And there are a couple of examples in the fuller report of one in particular of a lady that had daily treatment for cancer at Lincoln Hospital, lived in Skegness, and her day meant that she had to get up very early in the morning, around 4:30, something like that, to get the provided transport to go for her chemotherapy, and then wait for the transport to get home. And her day, in the end, she was getting home sort of tea time, because you have to wait for everyone that's on the bus to get on the bus to go back to the location. So, you know, so there's lots of incidences of people explaining how, because of, I suppose, the centralisation of services, so most main hospital appointments are Lincoln, Boston or Grimsby for East Lindsey, and if you live in the coastal towns, getting a direct public transport route is not feasible. There is the voluntary car service, but for some people on very low incomes, even just paying the mileage for that is not something they can easily do. The other thing around transport was that even when there is transport, when it runs, so it doesn't run in the evening, so any activities in the evening people can't get to. It doesn't normally run on Sundays. So transport was a big thing, and it came into play whenever there was talk of anything to do with social activities or health appointments. The issue of transport was a big one. Housing. Now, housing, what I've put in the report is that a lot of the focus groups all happened prior to COVID, and housing was hardly ever mentioned. And one of the things that we have wondered is whether, had this been done now, when people have had to stay in their houses a lot more, whether it would have been a priority for them. But generally speaking, housing was something that people were okay with. Some of the people in social housing were a bit unhappy about how long changes took, so how long it took to get a shower in when the person had a bath, and they said that they weren't able to have a bath. So there were some of those, but generally speaking, housing was not something that came through as a negative. I am also, and when we have a discussion, Michelle may want to come in a little bit about housing as well. So, you know, there may be issues that she's come across that might want to go in there. One of the interesting things that came from the professional survey was the lack of knowledge that professionals appear to have about housing provision, availability in all its forms, private rent, social housing, and also their awareness of applications for disability facilities grant. So when you looked at the data, and I have got some of the data here, for example, almost half the people that responded to the professional survey. Now, the professional survey went out to all the different organisations that I was aware of. It was also then forward cascaded by a number of people, so the LCVS cascaded it further. It was sent to all elected members, and it was sent to parish councils. The uptake was not massive, but in all of the responses, around 50% for every category, so between 49 and 51%, in those professionals did not know the answer to the questions: is there enough suitable private rented housing? Is there enough suitable social housing? Is there enough suitable housing to buy? Do older residents find it easy to secure the necessary adaptations to live well in their homes? And is housing support for older residents easily available and of a high standard? To each one of those questions, 50% of the respondents did not know the answer. So there's definitely a piece of work to be done amongst professional organisations on building their awareness of what's out there and how to access it, because that was quite a strong message, I think, there. From the point of view of social isolation, those living in smaller villages and isolated areas did report that they were feeling disconnected, and this was prior to COVID. So some of the feedback that I know that we had through the TED learning reports was about how isolated people were feeling. And I think access to digital is what makes the difference for a lot of people, but that does not solve all the issues. A lot of the good work that's been done in places like the Good Neighbour scheme, so Kerry at Hogsthorpe, getting out to see people has addressed some of that as well. But obviously not all villages have really good community sort of mutual aid groups. Some, you know, it's a bit like a Russian roulette sort of thing. The other thing that we found came up a lot was the amount of older people that live away from their extended family. So while there are some older people that don't have children or extended family that they're in contact with, there are a lot of people that don't actually live near their grown-up children. So the reasons for that are either because they've retired to this area and have no other kind of connection with this area and their children live somewhere else, but also, as we know, younger people often leave Lincolnshire for work purposes, so they will have established homes in other parts of the country or across the world. So there are a lot of older people in East Lindsey that have no other extended family locally. Another one of the challenges is the, because obviously ageing better is 50 plus, is the lack of decent work. There's a lot of low paid seasonal work in tourism and farming, and there's quite a high number of over 50s that are unemployed or employed in insecure kind of work without many prospects. And I'm guessing that's going to be worse as a result of COVID as well. Any questions at this point? No? Okay. So when, hang on, I'm going to move. It's good you get a narration of me doing the changing from different screens. So the opportunities we have are to create an age-friendly strategy and action plan, use the decade of healthy ageing as a springboard, build on what's already going well, and build on initiatives that are in their early stages. So if I just go through some of the ideas that we've got in the baseline of how that might work. So the strategy and action plan, it will be developed through multi-agency engagements and also include the voice of older people. Some of the items that we may want to include are an increase in awareness for professionals, for businesses and for the public, addressing the issue of ageism, improving outdoor spaces. So from the walking audits, there was quite a few smaller things that could probably get improved quite quickly, like, for example, boundaries. In Horncastle, and this is in the report, so in Horncastle, along the river there, the railings are a kind of greeny grey colour, the grass is a greeny grey colour, the water's a greeny grey colour, and if you are older and you've got slight sort of reduction in your visual acuity, it's quite hard to work out where the railings is, the boundary and the river and everything else. Whereas in Sutton-on-Sea, the bollards are a lovely bright blue, and so are other things. So actually people know where the bollards are because nothing else is bright blue. So just simple kind of changes when we look at boundaries like railings and curbs and those sorts of things, if they are sort of highlighted in a different colour, that makes a massive difference to an older person as they're walking around. It also has benefits for other people with visual impairment, but so there's quite a few small changes that could come from the walking audits. There will be, in a strategy and action plan, improving people's health and maintaining best health possible, focusing on the link between health and its connection to the other domains. So health and social isolation, health and transport, health and the home. Our health is impacted by all of these different elements. There was a report done by Let's Move. There was a scoping exercise on physical activity. So I would think we would want to look at improving people's physical activity in East Lindsey through intergenerational activities. And that's something that came up through various conversations about some of the opportunities that we might have to involve younger people with older people in physical activities. And the other thing is timings, and this is something I brought up with Magna Vitae, is that when I was looking for 50 plus activities, a lot of them are during the day when I'm at work. So you know, actually thinking about having activities for people in their 50s and 60s that still are at work but want to establish some kind of a new habit and routine, so that as they go into older age, they've already got those habits established. So a lot of the work in the 50s and 60s is about putting the preventative stuff in, so that when people are in their 70s, 80s and 90s, they have less issues. The Decade of Healthy Aging as a springboard. There hasn't been a lot of publicity around that. Again, that's been impacted by COVID. I anticipate there'll be more about that in the coming year or two, but definitely that's something that we can use as a springboard. So from the point of view of marketing and getting on the back of what the Centre for Ageing Better are doing, and the World Health Organization and the United Nations. Okay. Another element of the Decade of Healthy Aging is the embracing the diversity of older people. So I think when we start to look at age proud work and addressing stereotypes, we will be working in line with the decade as well. So building on what's going well and the early initiatives. So we've got the Towns Fund mentioned already, and I'm sure that Michelle and Ivan as well is involved. You know, you've got more of a detailed knowledge of what's up to date with that. So when we have a discussion, you may want to bring that in. There's the Lincolnshire Rural Partnership, which we're all aware of. So that's East Lindsey is in partnership with Lincolnshire County Council and the Centre for Ageing Better. And Amy is the manager. And so there's the opportunity to kind of build on that and work with that. And the meeting I was in, just for information, prior to this one, was actually a meeting that with Amy and two members of the Centre for Ageing Better about looking at a case study of what we've done in East Lindsey, so that Amy can use that to encourage other districts to come on board with in the age-friendly journey. So we need to build more on our kind of the good work that's happened over recent years. There's the TED Ageing Better programme, which has had its extension, so it's final year. Build on that and where we're going to go with that, the opportunities that has. There's the Age Friendly Futures project, which is only a single year project, but the findings from that could lead to other employment opportunities. And I know that the Fuller Working Live agenda within the DWP as well, they're always looking at stuff for the 50 pluses. We'd like to establish a new older persons forum, and I had been in talks with William and Roger prior to COVID about working this out, but I think it's definitely something that we need to push for. And it may be that because of our geography, we've got to be creative about how we have a forum, but I think it's really important that we do. And when you look at other areas internationally that work well with Ageing Better and better ageing projects and age-friendly communities and all the other things, that voice from an older persons forum is so important. Developing the other things that I've come up with, developing the concept of age-friendly tourism or recreation, and that came from an idea around our economy really, and the importance of tourism to the economy in East Lindsey and the number of tourists and visitors that are actually over 50. So I think that's something that we can work on, and I have been liaising with the world's area of outstanding natural beauty, and I've done a presentation to them, and I know they're interested in that. And then another thing that's come up quite recently really is aging well without children, which I think is a big gap all over the country, is the community of older people that are actually aging without any children. But it's definitely statistically a number of people that will grow in future years. And we are in the early stages of developing a project there with a member of the public that approached us who is aging without children. And so I'm working with her to develop some things, and William's going to join me in a meeting with her next week. So those are some of the things that, you know, we can build on already. And I think that's me for the minute.